Welcome to our podcast, where we discuss moral theories. Today we will be talking about psychological egoism. If you don't know what it is, it's a very controversial moral theory that suggests that all behaviors are motivated by what we perceive to be our own self-interest. In other words, any action is only done because it is beneficial to the doer of the action, and therefore people don't do good deeds out of the goodness of their heart, but rather for their own selfish desires. For example, to be an active volunteer in charity would really just be motivated by the fact that it may boost social image or have an element of self-satisfaction for the person. Psychological egoism also is not a theory about what humans ought to do, but more of what they already do. Hence the name psychological egoism. So it states that not only humans put their own interests first, but also that they are very capable of doing nothing else. Personally, I do not agree with this view.
But I do. And today, we will debate psychological egoism based on our opposing sides.
I personally do not believe that psychological egoism is correct, because I don't think that all of our actions are based on self-interest. Yes, of course, as humans we have many personal wants and desires, which our actions support, but wanting the best for others is a big part of humanity too. Actually, sometimes helping others in times of need could make us happier than only helping ourselves. Disregarding other people who need help can cause guilt. This is because we internally feel empathy for other people, regardless of how it is shown. There are countless examples of this. For example, sure, donating to charity could boost a person's social image, or maybe even provide a monetary benefit, but I think that their natural obligation to help people in need is what sparks that action. The idea that we are all driven by self-interest just does not hold up considering this. Another thing is that psychological egoism overlooks the idea that people sometimes risk their own lives or even sacrifice themselves for the sake of others. If we are truly motivated by purely self-interest, would we still do things that put us in harm's way just to help someone else? No one sacrifices their life expecting a self-benefiting prize or a reward for it. Most importantly, psychological egoism is also just not very plausible. Since psychological egoism is a scientific theory of human motives, the only way to verify it would be with scientific testing. But this theory is so vaguely formulated that it would be virtually impossible to do any scientific testing. So how could a scientific theory just based on impressions be logical? It just does not make sense when you look at human behavior in its entirety. So taking this into account, I do not believe that psychological egoism is a true moral theory.
I do believe that psychological egoism is correct. Every action we take, even those that appear to be altruistic, ultimately serve our own self-interest, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. This is because the only thing that anyone is even capable of desiring or pursuing is their own well-being and satisfaction. Imagine any possible act of kindness. Helping an old lady cross the street makes you feel good and satisfied. When you rescue a cat stuck in a tree, you experience a similar sense of fulfillment. In a more important situation, like saving a family from a burning building, public recognition and pride might come forth. In which case, there is an inherent benefit to the person helping. This instinct to help ourselves likely traces back to our evolutionary past. Back then, survival was the greatest concern of life. A caveman would not be like, hey, I should save that other caveman. In fact, the caveman might fight for resources and power. In such times, prioritizing one's own survival and well-being was the only rational approach. Over time, as society evolved and survival was not necessarily so significant, these selfish instincts become intertwined with the social need to cooperate, but the underlying drive for personal gain remained. And that is why the reasons for our actions are still self-interest. No matter how great the action is, there is always a benefit that internally causes said action.
So, if there was no personal benefit, I would reject helping anyone? Are you saying that if a baby was drowning and I had the ability and opportunity to save them, I wouldn't because it wouldn't benefit me? I disagree. Of course, looking out for myself is very important to achieve great things in life and to be my best self. But not every single action that I take revolves around me. I can recall countless times when I did acts of kindness that were completely selfless and had no benefit whatsoever to me. For instance, the holiday season is a very special time for helping others, and it provides no rewards for the people helping. I just believe that human instinct is not to be necessarily generous, but more sheltering and supportive. And yes, in our caveman years, survival caused us to be self-serving. But as we evolved, so did the trait of parental care. Back then, children were not loved, instead they were just the offspring who needed to survive. Now, children are their parents' most prized possessions. Parents even sacrifice their own well-being for the benefit of their children. They may work long hours, take on difficult jobs, or even endure personal hardship to provide more opportunities for their children. This kind of parental sacrifice does not always provide tangible or direct benefits for the parents. In fact, it involves real-life costs such as exhaustion, financial strain, and the emotional toll. It is the complex and deeply ingrained love that motivates this. This parental care ranges to other people as well. Seeing someone suffer causes empathy, and I believe that this is what sparks the so-called good actions. There is always a benefit that internally causes said action is very general. When you think about anything, there is always a benefit that could be thought of, as well as a drawback. So I don't think that's what causes actions, especially since there are many countless other motivations, like love, justice, and compassion. This type of behavior shows that humans are capable of goals that involve the welfare of others, which does not suggest that psychological egoism is true.
But those acts of kindness that you took, which you believe are selfless, really have a deeper motivation than simply empathy. The reason that we as humans feel empathy is because we feel like we are bad people not to help. When I say benefit, I don't mean just an obvious tangible benefit. It can also be the feeling of knowing you helped when you didn't even want to. Without that guilt, people will not volunteer as they do now. And yes, I agree that parents sacrifice themselves for their children, but it's not out of just love. They work long hours, take on difficult jobs, and endure personal hardship for the children can have a good education so they can go to great college and make a lot of money at a professional job when they're adults. Then they do the same for the children and the legacy continues of success. People prize possessions are their children because it's theirs. It's the same reason that every mother thinks their child is cute. Is their child. Also, I would agree that sacrifices do actually provide a benefit. Their family could receive a prize and they might have recognition. This especially applies to the military, and I do think that scientific testing is needed to make psychological egoism true. Yes, it is a theory based on human motives, but just by impression I think we can verify it. Just by looking at any possible action, we can notice there's a pattern. The pattern says that every action is in fact motivated by selfishness.
In conclusion, I think that psychological egoism is not a valid moral theory. This is because it suggests that every action is based on self-interest, but that cannot be true given that people feel deep empathy for people in need, and sometimes empathy sparks that action. I don't think that this can be proven or disproven due to the fact that psychological egoism is a theory about how it is, rather than how it ought to be, like most moral theories. Rather, it attempts to explain how the world already is based on impressions. But I do not think that impressions are enough to prove it true. Parental care is, in my opinion, one of the greatest examples of altruism. Parents act selflessly to give their children a happy life, and there are many other motivations besides self-interest that cause people to act. Therefore, I don't think that psychological egoism is a representation of how humans act.
I do think that psychological egoism is correct because looking at any possible action, there's always a benefit to the door of said action. This proves that psychological egoism is right. Ultimately, the only thing people are capable of pursuing is their own self-interest. The idea of looking out for oneself is rooted from humans' early life when survival was key. And now, we still prioritize our own success. In terms of proof, I believe that simply applying the theory to everyday example is enough proof to prove the theory true. So I think psychological egoism is true. What do you guys think? Is psychological egoism a valid moral theory?
Oh no, ethical ego is a terrible moral theory. It is all about self-interest with no trace.